ਸਾਹ ਕਿਰਿਆ ਜੀਵਨ ਦੇ ਮਹੱਤਵਪੂਰਨ ਲੱਛਣਾਂ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਰੀਰ ਨੂੰ ਗਤੀ, ਢਾਹ ਉਸਾਰੀ, ਵਾਧੇ ਅਤੇ ਵਿਕਾਸ, ਮਾਸਪੇਸ਼ੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਸੁੰਗੜਨ ਅਤੇ ਜਣਨ ਆਦਿ ਕਿਰਿਆਵਾਂ ਲਈ ਊਰਜਾ ਦਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਜਾਣਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਭੋਜਨ ਅਸੀਂ ਖਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਊਰਜਾ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਅਸਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਧਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਭੋਜਨ ਸਰੀਰ ਅੰਦਰ ਹਜ਼ਮ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਗਲੂਕੋਜ਼ ਵਰਗੇ ਸਾਧਾਰਨ ਯੌਗਿਕਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਦਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਗਲੂਕੋਜ਼ ਦੇ ਆਕਸੀਕਰਨ ਜਾਂ ਆਕਸੀਡੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਐਨਰਜੀ ਅਤੇ ਕਾਰਬਨ ਡਾਈਆਕਸਾਈਡ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ।
All living creatures, be it man or the smallest bacteria, have one function in common, which is known as respiration. Respiration, generally thought as the intake of fresh air and giving out the residual air. This exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place in the respiratory organs and is termed as external respiration or breathing. The oxygen combines with glucose in the cell to release energy. The released energy is used for various metabolic activities. This is called internal respiration or cellular respiration. Basically, animals derive energy from the food they eat and oxygen they take during breathing. The food consumed in our body is digested to glucose and other simple compounds. It is this glucose which is oxidized in the cells to give energy-rich molecules called ATP and carbon dioxide. Thus, respiration is just opposite to photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is an anabolic activity, while respiration is a catabolic activity.
Hello friends. Depending on whether oxygen is used in the process or not, respiration is of two types, aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic respiration is that type of respiration in which organic food is completely oxidized with the help of oxygen. Second type of respiration, that is anaerobic respiration, does not require the presence of oxygen. The term anaerobic means without air, and therefore anaerobic respiration refers to a special type of respiration which takes place without oxygen. Anaerobic respiration is the process of rearrangement of glucose molecules in the absence of oxygen. One example of anaerobic respiration is represented here. In the presence of enzymes, glucose breaks down into ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide, releasing small amount of energy. Before moving further into the detailed study of anaerobic respiration, let us share the learning objectives of today's lesson.
On completion of this topic, learners will be able to define anaerobic respiration, differentiate aerobic respiration from anaerobic respiration, state various types of anaerobic respiration, explain mechanism and economic importance of alcoholic fermentation, discuss lactic and acetic acid fermentation, demonstrate anaerobic respiration experimentally.
I told you there are two types of respiration, aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic respiration is a process that requires oxygen. But in anaerobic respiration, oxygen is not required. Aerobic and anaerobic respiration also differ in terms of the amount of energy that is produced. Aerobic respiration in any case is not possible without oxygen. The products of aerobic respiration are carbon dioxide and water along with energy. If we want to list the differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration, they are like this.
Aerobic respiration occurs in the presence of oxygen, whereas anaerobic respiration occurs in the absence of oxygen. If we compare the amount of energy produced in the two types of respiration, we see that energy produced in anaerobic respiration is comparatively less than the energy produced during aerobic respiration. A lot of energy is produced during aerobic respiration, which may be as high as 38 ATP molecules for every glucose molecule. This means that during aerobic respiration, each molecule of glucose is capable of producing about 38 energy units. Anaerobic respiration involves the rearrangement of atoms of the glucose molecule to produce ethyl alcohol or lactic acid, etc., whereas aerobic respiration involves complete oxidation of glucose to produce carbon dioxide and water. In higher organisms, aerobic respiration is a lifelong process, whereas anaerobic respiration may occur as a temporary process for a short period of time. The anaerobic respiration is the oldest method of respiration in primitive organisms. Many single-celled organisms which inhabit places and environments lacking oxygen use this form of respiration.
Enough about the differences. You will learn more when you explore anaerobic respiration in detail. Let us see an experiment demonstrating aerobic respiration. We know that germinating seeds respire aerobically in the presence of air. Let us see it.
Take a conical flask having germinating seeds in it. Suspend a small test tube containing potassium hydroxide solution in it. Cork the flask. On the other side, put a beaker almost half filled with water. Introduce a twice bent delivery tube, one in the conical flask and the other end should dip in the water present in beaker. Mark the initial level of water in the tube. This apparatus is made airtight and allowed to stand for a couple of hours. You know oxygen is present in the flask. Germinating seeds will absorb oxygen and release carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide, present in the air or produced during aerobic respiration, will be absorbed by potassium hydroxide present in the small tube, thus creating a vacuum. As the apparatus is airtight, the space thus created is occupied by the rising water in the tube. Rise in water level in the delivery tube thus indicates the utilization of oxygen from the air present in the flask.
So this was a small experiment to prove our point that during normal respiration, oxygen is utilized. Now let us move on to anaerobic respiration. First of all, let us try to find out where exactly anaerobic respiration occurs. It occurs in many prokaryotes and even in unicellular eukaryotes. Some yeasts and bacteria use anaerobic respiration. Fermentation of the alcohol carried out by yeast is a perfect example of anaerobic respiration. It is commercially used to produce ethanol. However, the end product of fermentation and anaerobic oxidation are similar. Let us see some other organisms where anaerobic respiration takes place.
Some plants, when get waterlogged, do follow anaerobic respiration. Normal plants under adverse conditions such as flooding respire anaerobically. Anaerobic respiration is the exclusive mode of respiration for meeting respiratory requirements of parasitic worms growing in anaerobic conditions like tapeworm living inside the human intestine. Sometimes in our body also, lactic acid formation takes place due to anaerobic respiration. Our bodies can store glucose but can't store oxygen. During heavy exercise, the muscle cells fall short of oxygen supply and the glucose breaks into 2-pyruvate, resulting in the formation of lactic acid. Energy is produced, but the lactic acid accumulates in our muscles. This build-up lactic acid in our muscles makes us feel tired and might even cramp up our muscles.
Fermentation and anaerobic respiration. Fermentation is different from anaerobic respiration in higher organisms in several ways. Fermentation is extracellular while anaerobic respiration is intracellular, that is, occurs within the cell. In fermentation, the enzyme zymase present in enzyme complex of the cell is used. Butcher in 1897 noted that fermentation could occur even without the living yeast cells. He killed the yeast cells by grinding them under pressure and mixed the extract with a sugary solution. The enzymes complex present in the extract was termed zymase. It is due to the presence of this enzyme complex zymase that fermentation occurred even in the absence of living yeast cells. Therefore, fermentation is also alternatively termed as zymosis because it occurs in the presence of enzyme zymase. During fermentation, we often see a frothy appearance in the medium. This is because of release of carbon dioxide. We can define fermentation as the anaerobic breakdown of carbohydrates and other organic compounds into alcohols, organic acids, gases, etc. with the help of microorganisms or from their enzymes. But anaerobic respiration and fermentation are not synonymous because many fermentations are aerobic, such as the formation of acetic acid. Or we may say that all partial biological oxidations are collectively known as fermentation. Today, we shall mainly study two examples of anaerobic fermentation, which are alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. And one example of aerobic fermentation, acetic acid fermentation. Let us start with alcoholic fermentation.
Alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation is the most widely studied fermentation. It takes place due to anaerobic respiration occurring in yeast cells. Yeasts are of great economic importance because they produce commercially important ethanol, supporting the wine industry, and carbon dioxide for leavening of breads. If we look at the equation of ethanol fermentation, in the first step, glucose breaks down to form two molecules of pyruvic acid, and this step is termed as glycolysis. It is a common pathway for both aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. If conditions are anaerobic, means no oxygen is present, the pyruvic acid first gets decarboxylated to produce carbon dioxide and acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is then reduced to ethanol by accepting hydrogen from NADH2 produced during glycolysis, whereas in the presence of oxygen, we know pyruvic acid breaks up into water and carbon dioxide, releasing lots of energy. We can summarize alcoholic fermentation in an equation as shown here, where glucose breaks down into ethyl and carbon dioxide. C6H12O6 gives 2C2H5OH plus 2 carbon dioxide. Let's see an experiment which demonstrates alcoholic fermentation in the yeast. Take a test tube containing dilute solution of glucose. Add a pinch of baker's yeast. A thin layer of oil is put over it to prevent contact with air. The mouth of the tube is closed with a cork, and a delivery tube is dipped in lime water. We see air bubbles coming out from the end of the delivery tube dipped in the lime water. The lime water is also seen to turn milky. Not only lime water turning milky, but the smell of alcohol on opening the cork of the test tube also confirms presence of alcohol in the solution of sugar and yeast. Thus, we can see that anaerobic respiration by yeast results in the production of alcohol and carbon dioxide. This ethanol or ethyl alcohol does not stay inside yeast, but is excreted. Accumulation of alcohol beyond a certain limit, that is 13 to 14% in yeast, will kill the microorganism.
Students, you know alcoholic fermentation also occurs in higher plants when these plants face waterlogged conditions. The plants that get submerged in water during floods survive due to temporary respiration which takes place under anaerobic conditions. Since a higher toxic concentration of alcohol starts accumulating in the cells, most plants, if flooded for many days, soon die. But we see many aquatic plants and crops such as rice survive in standing waters because of their ability of utilizing oxygen dissolved in water for their respiration. ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ fermentation ਵੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਨੂੰ lactic acid fermentation ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। ਇਹ fermentation lactic acid bacteria ਦੀ ਸਹਾਇਤਾ ਨਾਲ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ। ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ fermented products ਬਣਾਉਣ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਬੈਕਟੀਰੀਆ ਬਹੁਤ ਮਦਦਗਾਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਨ।
The most commercially important genus of lactic acid fermenting bacteria is Lactobacillus. You know, milk sugar or lactose is fermented by these bacteria to lactic acid, which causes the conversion of milk to curd. This acid helps in restricting the growth of food poisoning bacteria. You know, lactic acid formation occurs in our muscles also. This you might have experienced many times when you do rigorous exercise in deficiency of oxygen. Deficiency of oxygen in our body leads to production of lactic acid in the muscles, thus causing fatigue. This lactic acid present in the muscles is slowly sent to liver to regenerate glucose. In lactic acid fermentation, the pyruvic acid produced in glycolysis is directly reduced by NADH to form lactic acid. No carbon dioxide is produced. One molecule of glucose is ultimately converted to 2 molecules of lactic acid.
Acetic acid fermentation. Now let us discuss another bacteria which carry out fermentation in presence of oxygen. These are acetic acid bacteria. Dilute acetic acid produced by natural fermentation is called vinegar. Acetic acid in the form of vinegar is fermented by acetic acid bacteria of the genus Acetobacter. Let us see the reactions taking place during the acetic acid fermentation. The fermentation of acetic acid involves 2 types of biochemical reactions. Glucose is fermented to alcohol by the action of yeast species. During second reaction, alcohol produced is oxidized to acetic acid by the bacteria Acetobacter. During this reaction, ethyl alcohol breaks down into acetic acid and water and energy is released. Here, as this fermentation takes place in presence of oxygen, therefore known as aerobic fermentation. Fermentation is the process of deriving energy from organic compounds, sometimes under anaerobic conditions, whereas as in others under aerobic conditions. Here we saw that sugars are the most common substrate of fermentation, converting into different products like ethanol, lactic acid, acetic acid, etc. There are some other important utilization of fermentation process in various industries which can be listed like this.
In baking industry, as carbon dioxide evolved during alcoholic fermentation makes the bread spongy. Tea and tobacco leaves are cured and provided with a fine flavor through fermentation. Retting of jute is also carried by bacterial fermentation. In some cases, antibiotics and other drugs can be prepared by fermentation. Cleaning of raw hides is carried out by bacterial fermentation in the leather industry. Another application of the fermentation process is in the treatment of wastewater. Aerobic bacteria are used to ferment organic material present in wastewater. Solid wastes are converted to carbon dioxide, water, and mineral salts. However, apart from all these benefits, fermenting organisms also cause spoilage of food and may even cause food poisoning by releasing toxins.
I hope the concept of anaerobic respiration is clear to all of you. Let us recapitulate what we have learned so far. This form of respiration is very primitive and had started from the time or period when oxygen was missing in our atmosphere. Many living organisms have successfully adapted to anaerobic form of respiration to survive under adverse conditions. During anaerobic respiration, carbohydrates are partly oxidized and chemical energy is released. Some yeasts and bacteria and some muscle tissue use anaerobic respiration. Fermentation of the alcohol, which produces ethanol, is a perfect example of anaerobic respiration. Fermentation is defined as the anaerobic breakdown of carbohydrates and other organic compounds into alcohol, organic acids, gases, etc. with the help of microorganisms or their enzymes. We saw that in alcoholic fermentation, ethyl alcohol is formed. Lactic acid fermentation is caused by some fungi and bacteria. The most important lactic acid producing bacteria is Lactobacillus. The main method of producing curd in our houses is through the lactic acid fermentation of milk. ਸਾਡਾ ਸ਼ਰੀਰ ਗਲੂਕੋਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਸਟੋਰ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਪਰ ਆਕਸੀਜਨ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ। ਉਸ ਸਥਿਤੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਰੀਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਕਸੀਜਨ ਘੱਟ ਹੋਵੇ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਸਰੀਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਆਕਸੀਜਨ ਨਾਲ ਕਿਰਿਆ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਬਜਾਏ ਸਰੀਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਗਲੂਕੋਜ਼ lactic acid ਵਿੱਚ ਟੁੱਟ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। Acetic acid fermentation, which is used in the vinegar industry, is an example of aerobic fermentation, that is, fermentation in presence of oxygen. This way we studied that all fermentations are not only anaerobic. So students, before we say goodbye, here is a quick test for you to find out how much you have actually learned from today's topic. The first question is, name the most common respiratory substrate. The answer is, glucose is the most common respiratory substrate. The next question is, anaerobic respiration of yeast produces. The options are nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide or water. The answer is option C, that is carbon dioxide. Next question, fill in the blank. For carrying out alcoholic fermentation in a sugar solution, dash is added. Answer, and the complete sentence is, for carrying out alcoholic fermentation in a sugar solution, yeast is added. The next question is, lactic acid fermentation occurs in absence of oxygen. Is it true or false? The answer is, it is true that all lactic acid producers are microaerophilic, means they require small amounts of oxygen to function. They can even respire in complete absence of oxygen. Next question, complete the sentence. Dough kept overnight in a warm place becomes soft and spongy due to dash. The answer is, fermentation leads to the formation of carbon dioxide. So we can say dough kept overnight in a warm place becomes soft and spongy due to fermentation. My next question is, acetic acid fermentation involves two processes. Explain them briefly. Answer. First of all, glucose is fermented to alcohol by the action of yeast, as shown on the screen. During second reaction, alcohol thus produced is oxidized to acetic acid by the bacteria Acetobacter. You can see the chemical reaction of this process on the screen. The next question is, where does anaerobic respiration occur in humans? The answer is in the muscle cells during heavy exercise. The next question is, list at least 4 industrial uses of fermentation. Answer. Fermentation is used in many types of industries like beverage industry, production of vinegar, used in bread industry, and used in leather industry. I hope all your doubts about anaerobic respiration are clear today, and hope you are looking forward to our next class. Until then, goodbye.